I make the recommendation in my book, like if you don't have a dog, offer to walk your neighbor's dog.
Mhm.
Like your neighbor will like that, and you'll still,
Mhm.
you'll still have this opportunity. So they can be
Right.
small connections. It can be having a conversation with the person who you get, makes your coffee, or someone at the grocery store.
Right.
All of those human connections are really important. And going back to our overuse of phones, if you have your nose buried in your phone all the time,
Mhm.
you miss
Mhm.
the opportunity to have even those small connections.
That's
And
right.
that is, that's a message I've really, for years, have been really trying to get out. So it's there. The phones are bad for us in so many ways. This is
Yeah.
just another example.
Welcome back to the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. In this week's episode, join Michael Kahn for an enlightening and hopeful interview with Shalani George, a professor of legal writing at Suffolk University Law School.
The thing that we haven't talked about is that I'm actually teaching a pilot course at Suffolk this semester, actually this year, called Preparing for Professional Success. And that
Oh,
is really very specifically meant to be a well-being course.
hmm.
And I've had the joy really of working with some students. We've used my book, and we've used a lot of other resources from positive psychology and elsewhere
Wow.
to have, yeah, the opportunity to talk about these things in an academic environment.
And is this something you've already done, or this is something you're preparing to do?
Doing doing it's
Doing.
this,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
that's
it's
great.
it's this academic year, so we started last fall. It's just a pilot, so in fact tomorrow I will be reporting to my faculty
Hmm.
about the results and asking for the pilot to be expanded and continued next
Yeah.
year. So it's a big step, and there are, I'd say, 15 or 20 schools around the country that have some sort of class along these lines. I think a lot of schools are trying to figure out, how do you get
I
these
would love
topics?
to see that. If you're, I don't know if you're allowed to, but I would love to see the syllabus for
Sure. Yeah,
that
sure,
program. I'd be really
sure.
curious to, because all the stuff we're talking about here can lawyers can use. Folks
Yes,
who are out there practicing. This is all not limited to law school by any means.
right.
So I'd love to see what you're teaching them. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been an interesting experience, and like I said, so we
Hmm.
used my book, so you have an idea. First semester, it was
Hmm.
mostly the
Okay,
chapters
that
of
was
my
your book.
book.
Was the textbook
Yeah,
basically?
Suffolk
Hmm.
very generously donated, or gave the students who volunteered to take this class a copy of
Hmm.
my book. That was part of their incentive. They're not paying tuition for it, and they've volunteered to take this extra credit class.
Hmm.
So we used my textbook, and then this semester we've been a little bit more focused on. So we had the first class of the semester was about processing bad news, or because they had gotten their grades, and we talked about, what have we learned first semester, and how do we translate that, taking these grades into um, approaching certain things differently second semester. I had a class on networking. I had my students
So
practice
go
networking.
back to that just for a second. The
Sure.
processing bad news. That's
Yes.
intriguing to me. So
Hmm.
you talk to them about how to process bad news, how
Grades.
to
Yeah.
cope with it, how
Yes.
to
Yes. It.
respond to it, how to
Yes.
work through it, all that stuff.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Wow,
How to take
that
positive.
is not that is not what most of us in law school, at least in my
None of
generation,
us,
talked about.
none of us, Michael, had this kind of stuff in law school.
Hmm.
It's been really interesting. Like, I knew that this was
Hmm.
something that I wanted to talk to them about. I
Hmm.
learned so much this year from them, because the primary work that they do for the class is journal writing. So I had had a sense, because I teach first year students and I teach a required first year course. I certainly had a sense that particular times of the year stress them out more than others, that they were worried about getting, a grade on their first legal writing memo. Like, I knew these things intrinsically, but in this new course that I was teaching this year, I was actually reading. They weren't my legal writing students. We made sure that I didn't have my own students in my class, but they're in other legal writing courses. I'm reading them their journal entries when they're getting these grades, and they're thinking,
Oh,
oh my
wow.
gosh, they're writing things like, oh my gosh, I don't know, I'll never get a good grade. I don't know if I can
Hmm.
make it. I don't know if I can do this. I can't believe
Mhm.
I gotta, whatever. And so I had the opportunity to just kind of help them process through it. I don't know if you got to the part in my book where I reveal that I got a very bad grade my first year in law school.
And Tort was it Tort's
Torts,
class?
yeah.
Yes, yes,
S-
I did. That was, I think, the resilience chapter, I think, was where that was,
yeah.
right?
So,
Yeah.
I got a C in
You can share
torts.
that. Yeah, share that
Yeah.
with the folks.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
I put it in the book, so obviously I'm willing to share it. I will
Right.
tell you the story that somebody who was reading for me as I was writing said, "Are you sure you want to say that? I mean, do you want to just say you got a bad grade?" And I said, "I'm going to say it because if I say I got a bad grade, people will think I mean I got a B." And I
Sure.
think it's important for everybody to recognize that we can get past these setbacks. So, the students had read, right, that I got a C in torts. And so it's not me, some professor who's never had to struggle with anything, standing up, at the front of the room and saying,
Mhm.
you'll be fine. I could actually say, yeah, this was really tough. I questioned my decision to go to law school. I questioned whether I was smart enough or what was I doing wrong. But here's how I learned from it. I learned I had a real issue with multiple choice questions, and I knew I had to fix it because I was going to have to take a bar exam, and here are the steps I took. So I
That's
you
great.
know
That, by the way, all of your teaching sounds fantastic, and that lesson is as important as everything else you've talked about. Just modeling vulnerability to students, and
yeah,
modeling imperfection, because that can be such a
right,
big issue for lawyers.
right,
That whole idea about perfectionism, and I know in the
right.
book you talk about the growth versus fixed mindsets,
Hmm.
which is relevant to all this too. The idea of
Yeah,
that a lot of people, but lawyers in particular, have this mindset that they're a fixed product.
right,
They're all done. There's no more work to be done on them. It's
right,
all
right,
versus growth, which is, yeah, I'm going to make mistakes and learn from them, and that
right,
can be a real
right.
important shift in mindset, right? Not to
Yeah,
go off
yeah.
the topic, but I think it's all
No,
related to
absolutely.
what you're talking about.
Absolutely. There's that, this idea that they sometimes think everybody else gets it better than they do, or
Hmm.
gets it easier than they do. So those are things that we talk about in this new class, and I think they appreciate hearing, from the other students, like, no, I really struggled with that too. They tell me that they're able to be vulnerable in that class in a way that they just can't obviously anywhere else in law school. So I
Hmm.
do think that's, is a valuable thing. And they think that, oh, everybody else is so smart. That's that fixed mindset, and it's good to be able to talk to them about various. I mean, I've had struggles. I've had lots of struggles, and I don't mind talking about them. They've made me, they've gotten me to where I am. Maybe my life would have taken a different turn if I had handled something differently. So I think there's no right or wrong, but we have to recognize that there's something that we can take and learn from, all of those setbacks. So I'm
Hmm.
learning from these students too. I mean, that's the really fun part.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. As a therapist, I'm always learning from my clients. That's not the
Hmm.
goal, of course.
Yeah.
Goal is for me to help them,
Right.
but you just can't help but learn from
Yes.
folks, and just hearing their stories,
Yes.
and how they have their resilience.
Yes.
Certainly is something I can gain from as well. It sounds like you do too.
I do.
Um, there are some things in the book I want to go to also. We've already spoken about some of these things, but I really you talk about how important it is. This is in the resilience chapter too, to build and cultivate social connections,
Right.
and that's something I also, particularly COVID has made it worse.
Hmm.
That folks are more isolated,
Right.
and lawyers can tend to be isolated.
Right.
Back to what we just said, they're
Right.
not being vulnerable, or feeling like they're the only ones, so they can't share that they've made a mistake.
Right.
Or with younger lawyers, they can definitely, um, believe that it's not in their best interest to share
Right.
mistakes or vulnerability, right? Do you speaking of that, younger associates, do you talk to do you have contact with students who have graduated and
Yes.
who are practicing? And
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I do. I have some wonderful students who keep in touch with me after they graduate. Mostly, what I hear from them is about their legal writing. They like to tell me how well,
How they're doing,
yeah, all the
whether they've been
compliments.
prepared,
Yeah, they like to relay all the compliments they get on their writing.
right?
But yeah, I do hear from students that it can be a sort of a rude awakening at various times when they realize that they're not going to go to their boss and say, "Gosh, I'm feeling kind of down today," or
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not loving what I have. The kinds of conversations, unfortunately, that I have more than anything else are students who come back to me and say, "I'm not loving what I'm doing, and I'm trying to figure out what else I might like to do." And the
Hmm.
fact that I have those conversations is part of what inspires me, I think, to be involved in this work. And it kind of goes back to, I think, something I said at the very beginning, which is nobody is coming to law school feeling like, I hope I burn out in a few years. I really hope,
Right,
that I have a serious mental health issue. But
right.
that's what I end up seeing. And that's part of what motivates me, I think, has motivated me to become so involved in this kind of work, because I do see that. So you asked about social connections. I think
Yeah.
the connection even between a student and a professor that goes
Hmm.
beyond the law, or the specifics of a class, even that connection is something that can help students through some of these tougher times. So
Absolutely. I
um,
actually stayed connected with, actually, coincidentally, my legal writing professor from law school.
see.
And he also taught property. He ended up, he was an associate dean of the law school, and we became good friends. And he became good friends with some of us. We actually would go on, enter softball tournaments for
Mhm.
law schools, and then for alumni
Mhm.
law school softball tournaments. But he was a great resource for me
Well,
up until,
that's
sadly, he passed away a couple
oh.
of years ago.
Well, and that I'm sorry to hear. Um,
Yeah.
that's one of the great things about legal writing, is that that's one of the courses that's smaller, and so we do get to know
Hmm.
our students. I think that's one of the issues. I think you said earlier about how the first year is a particularly tough time. I just had
Yeah.
one of my students in my office the week before last who was emotional. I think it surprised her that as she was talking, she became emotional. And I found that mostly what I was saying to her is, "You just have to get past this year. I promise it will be different if you get past this year."
Hmm.
Why do we have to say things like that?
Right.
Why can't we think about changing that first year experience
Hmm.
just a little bit? So
Hmm.
the connections are really important. Um, Even if it's walking your dog. I mean, I use dog walking in a lot of my
Hmm.
examples because I walk my dog a lot, and I
Yep.
love seeing people and neighbors and, you
And
know,
dogs, and you're preaching the choir here. I love
yeah,
dogs, and dogs also, they help you connect with people too.
they do.
'Cause people
They
see
do.
your dog and then want to
Yeah.
ask you questions. What kind of dog is?
Yeah.
Can I pet your dog?
Super
And
easy
it
way
brings,
to make friends. Yeah.
yes. And you see people. I loved my dog. Don't mean this to be a don't mean this to be a podcast about loss, but our dog passed during COVID.
Oh.
So that's something I'm really missing,
Mhm.
because one of the things I'm noticing is, of course, missing her, but missing the
Missing
connection I make
connections.
with people
Yeah.
through her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I make the recommendation in my book, like, if you don't have a dog, offer to walk your neighbor's dog.
Hmm.
Like, your neighbor will like
Hmm.
that, and
Hmm.
you'll still have this opportunity. So they can be
Right.
small connections. It can be having a conversation with the person who makes your coffee, or someone at the grocery store.
Right.
Um, all of those human connections are really important. And going back to our overuse of phones, if you have your nose buried in your phone all the time,
Mhm.
you miss
Mhm.
the opportunity to have even those small connections.
That's
And
right.
that is, that's a message I've really, for years, have been really trying to get out. So it's there. The phones are bad for us in so many ways. This is
Yeah,
just another example. Um,
agreed. Yeah. So go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
The only thing I was going to say is that when
Yeah.
I didn't say this earlier when you asked me how I
Mhm.
got into teaching or about my career path, but
Oh, yeah.
when I
Okay.
decided I wanted to teach, I reached out to my legal writing professor. She's
Oh,
the
that's
one,
funny.
yeah, she's the one who I took her out to lunch and she gave me a few very good pieces of advice and kind of pushed me in the right direction. So I think
Mhm.
those connections, as we said, they stay with us.
So you have some other things, and we've got a few minutes left, and I definitely want to give you time at the end to share anything I haven't asked you about. I'm really intrigued with that course.
Hmm.
Um, so, I'd love to stay connected with you after this podcast to learn more about that course you're teaching because that's
Sure,
fascinating.
sure,
But there are some things in the book I just wanted to that I think are important that I wanted to put out there and see if you want to speak any more to them.
sure.
One was self compassion.
Hmm.
You mentioned that in your book, and would you like to expand on that topic?
Sure, sure. I think we're all so hard on ourselves, and the practice of law requires, I think, so much emotional work sometimes that if we don't take care of ourselves, I think it's very hard to be there for for clients. And I think that's another thing that can lead to burnout so easily.
Hmm.
I think I give the example in the book of one of my children who's very hard on himself. Um, so we have to change the way we talk to ourselves, and I just think that's something that takes a lot of practice. I
It
think
does.
the personality of people who come to law school, we touched on this a little bit in the fixed mindset, but there's also, and we talked about perfectionism. There's this drive I think that people have. They come to law school, they've been successful before and they need to be successful in law school, and it's very hard to recognize that maybe if you've always been an A student before and you're not quite an A student now, that doesn't mean you're not smart or that you're not going to make it in the law. But we're very quick to take small setbacks and make them really big in our head, and we're very reluctant to take small victories and make them bigger
Hmm.
in our head. So I
Right.
just try to have those kinds of conversations with my students in this new course in particular, but even in my legal writing course, to try to just try to emphasize that point, that don't float past the good news to focus only on the bad news. I
Yeah.
think it's human nature, and you probably know this more than I do, that as humans, I think we tend to do that. So it's something that we have to actively work on and fight
And lawyers
against.
even more. The law students are
Yeah,
trained to do this, and
yeah,
lawyers even more so
right,
to issue spot, right, and to
right.
look
Oh,
for
and the adversarial system, and
right.
all of that is, there's winners and there's losers, and the
That's right.
Socratic method. I mean,
Hmm.
certainly a laundry list of things about people who go to law school and about the law school environment that I think brings that out even more, and thus the need for self compassion even more.
You also mentioned in your book the importance of having a sense of meaning
Hmm.
for in your life, and I guess in terms of what you do work wise.
Hmm.
Uh, did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure, sure. So this is a topic that actually we have spent a significant amount of time talking about in my new class. And I think it's really important, again, in the first year of law school. So we have sometimes these grand ideas and goals about why we want to go into law. You have this image of yourself maybe as a prosecutor or a public defender or working for legal aid or whatever your dream job is. And then you hit the first year of law school and you forget that that was your dream, because it's contracts, property, torts, common law,
Right,
the curve, the
right.
Socratic method, like all of those things that we've talked about. And so, one of the things that we try and do in this new class is take students back to those original goals. Like, what was the idea of what you wanted? What is it you dreamt of doing? And how can we connect you back to that original place and meaning? So that's one thing. The other thing is just we talk generally. There's a great TED talk that somebody clued me into, in which I had my students watch this year, about happiness and how chasing happiness is never going to make you happy. So we
Hmm.
kind of have been able to have this talk. It's so helpful to me too, that if you always think that there's this one thing that's going to make you happy, if I get an A in contracts, then I'm going to be happy. If I get
Right.
this internship, I'm going to be happy. And it never makes you happy because you move on to the next thing. So thinking beyond, what those small goals or ideas are, and trying to link our efforts and our time in law school back to that bigger meaning that we thought about, that got us
Hmm.
to law school, or that motivated an interest in the law. That can help, and that can really help in processing bad news and things too, because you can put it in the box it needs to be in, so that you can keep moving forward with learning about the law and getting towards that place that you originally dreamt of, in thinking about a career in law.
And that brings us back to mindfulness too,
Yes.
as far as happiness is concerned, rather than being attached to a thing or an event, to be mindful day to moment to moment of the
Yeah.
things that impact you in a good way, or
Y-
make you happy or content in some way.
right. Absolutely. One of the things, so I did a mindfulness course myself last summer when I had some time, and one of the things that really has stayed with me whenever I do something like that is the loving kindness meditation,
Hmm.
where you think of someone or something that makes you feel unkind, or that has given you trouble, and you turn that conversation around. You try to understand where that person or thing is coming from, and you meet it with love or kindness. And it sounds trite, and yet it can be incredibly powerful. And it helps one recognize just how powerful our own minds and bodies are, and how much we can turn that conversation around.
And you mentioned in your resources section, I want to mention him too. Sadly, he passed a few weeks ago. Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yes,
You have a couple of his books in
I
your
do.
bibliography, in your book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, and
Yes.
You Are Here.
Yes.
And I would highly recommend. He's written, I can't even tell you how many books he's written. So those are two of them,
Yeah.
and he's written so many more. Some are specifically on a topic like anger,
Yes.
um, but I just wanted to acknowledge that you have referred to him in your book, and that he's
Yeah.
somebody I wanted to mention here as well.
He's a very relatable, and yet so
Yeah,
so incredibly wise. So
yeah.
I find, he's easy to read and easy to connect with.
Hmm. So you've already mentioned some of the things that you do,
Hmm.
but are there any other things that you would say you do that help you manage your stress, or help you focus on those areas, those dimensions that we mentioned earlier in the well-being task force graphic? What are some other things that are helpful for you?
So that's actually an easy question for me, Michael. My number one stress relieving activity is exercise. I
Hmm.
am just a huge proponent of exercise in whatever fashion one enjoys exercising. Um, I have been working with my students on this too, where they keep a physical activity log, and we talk about the very many ways in which movement is helpful. So, going back to those dimensions of well being, I try to focus a lot of my conversations when I do workshops or guest lecture or talk to groups on intellectual well being and physical well being, because it's easy to convince law students or lawyers that they should care about their intellectual well being. That is their
Right.
ability to perform their work as lawyers. It's very easy for me, to get an audience to want to listen to ways in which we can improve that. it's improved in part by physical exercise. And so it's like this win-win situation, right? Where you're taking care of your body by exercising, but you're also taking care of your mind. And the connection between mind and body is so strong and so powerful. We
Yeah.
think with our bodies too. And so by connecting those two topics really explicitly, and helping people see why devoting an hour a day or 45 minutes a day, even when you're super busy or you just feel like you don't have time, it sometimes is the first thing people will give up, but it's counterproductive. It's counterproductive to mental productivity, it's counterproductive to our physical health, it's counterproductive to mental health. So I say in the book, and I very much believe this, that exercise is one of the few things in life where it may feel like a chore when you start, but once you devote yourself to it, it is this amazing joy, and it is something that pays you back, exponentially in terms of brain, body, physical, mental health,
And
all of it.
including movement throughout your day too.
Yeah,
I agree with you on the
yeah,
exercise. I went jogging this morning,
excellent.
um, but doing some kind of movement throughout your day, and it can be just getting out of your chair
Yes.
and stretching,
Yep.
or walking from your office to the restroom,
Right. Or taking the
or going
stairs.
outside,
Yeah,
or taking the stairs.
taking the stairs.
Absolutely.
I mean,
In
all of that.
fact, one thing that you might appreciate, my partner she's a PhD student here, and she teaches as well,
Mhm.
and always incorporates movement in her class.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's in the School of Education, so movement isn't necessarily part of the syllabus,
Yes.
but she always incorporates some kind of movement exercise in the class, and also mindfulness with
Well,
them.
can you picture this, Michael? In my legal writing class and in my new class, the Preparing for Professional Success, I on the day that I was going to have them do the deep focused work. Before that, I actually had them stand up and I put some music on and I appointed a
Hmm.
leader, and somebody just marched the whole class around the room for a few minutes
That's
before we
great.
sat down to work. And yeah, sometimes they look at
Yeah.
me like she is really
Hmm.
crazy, but they can feel the effects. They
Yes.
can feel the effects of it. So that really is my number one for me, um, stress reliever, because I know it's doing so many good things for me. And
Yeah.
I have had my many ups and downs myself as I was writing this book. I just a lot of personal setbacks, and exercising, going to the gym, seeing my friends at the gym, going for a run, breathing fresh air, going for a walk, walking my dog, all of that, I firmly believe, is what helped me get through some of the really tough times that I had.
and 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 being outside, being in nature, there's research that shows that being around, away from
Yes.
cars, away from loud
Yes.
roads, being in nature. You don't have to be the top of Mount Everest. Just put yourself in an area, walk where there's trees and greenery.
Right.
That can, in one research study, indicated that it reduced that part of the brain that ruminates.
Yes.
So it reduces rumination and
Yes.
anxiety.
Have you read about this thing called attention restoration theory? ART, it's called.
I don't know. Tell me about it. I've read about that issue, but I've never heard of that acronym.
Yeah, it's called capital ART, attention restoration
Hmm.
theory, and the
Okay.
idea is that we have a limited amount of focus really available to us in a day. So
Hmm.
4 hours maybe of deep focus. But one of the ways that you can replenish your attention is by going out in nature, not just any nature though. So there was a study that was done. And they took some students, two groups of students, and they were going to have them do some memory and concentration tasks. But they sent one group of students to walk through. This was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, to walk through nature basically for 20 minutes. They sent the other group of students to walk through the city for 20 minutes. And the group that walked through nature performed better on the memory and concentration tasks after their walk than the group that walked
Hmm.
through the city. So it wasn't just being outside, it was being able to be free from thought and focus. So the group that was walking through the city still had to kind of navigate crosswalks and traffic
Hmm.
and people and things that caught their attention. Whereas being
Right.
out in nature, where you genuinely are just breathing in the air, admiring the flowers, listening to the birds, that is going to replenish your attention resources in a way that allows you to produce or to be more productive when you go back into work. And
That's great.
yeah, and then they did it again because they thought maybe it was just a really nice day or something. They actually sent one group out like in the dead of winter, and they still performed better. So it wasn't weather
Hmm.
related or anything like that. It's
Right.
just the ability to let your mind rest. That will give you
Makes
better
sense.
focus. Yeah,
Attention restoration theory.
attention restoration theory. Yep.
Okay. Well, I want to give you a moment. We're at the end of a very quick interview. At least my experience was was quick. What is there any last thing you want to say before we wrap our discussion today?
We've really covered pretty much everything, Michael. The last thing I will
Hmm.
just say is that the American Bar Association has recently passed some new standards for law schools, which are encouraging law schools. Not encouraging; they're actually going to be requiring law schools to think about something called professional identity formation. And
Hmm.
under that, they include instruction on well-being practices. So I'm really hopeful that courses like mine and other courses that I know people are working on will become more commonplace. And so I appreciate the opportunity to spread the word a little bit. And if anybody would like to contact me for more information or to kind of put our heads
And why don't you
together.
give your contact info if you'd like?
Sure, sure. My email is the best way to get in touch with me. It's
Hmm.
sgeorge@suffolk.edu.
And
I'm
Suffolk
also
is
on
spelled
SU
SUFFOLK, right?
SUFFOLK. That's correct.
Okay.
I'm also on LinkedIn, and I've connected with some people on LinkedIn who I've been sharing information with. But between the different organizations that we talked about my involvement in and what I'm doing at Suffolk, I'm really working hard to collect and disseminate as much of this as we can because I think law students and lawyers really need it.
And we'll give. I'll offline. I'll get all of that contact information, email, social media, and
Great.
we'll put that in the description of the program as well.
Super. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, Shalini, thank you so much for your time. I could spend another hour or two with you to talk to you about this. Maybe we'll have a podcast too.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, and I will follow up with you to learn more about your class. That really sounds fascinating to me.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, listeners, for coming back and listening to the Thriving Lawyers. Hopefully, you'll be back again soon. Bye
Thank you
bye.
so much. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. We love hearing from our loyal listeners, so please feel free to email us any questions, comments, suggested topics, or guest recommendations at the following address: feedback@thrivinglawyerspodcast.com. The Thriving Lawyers Podcast is brought to you by Real-Time Creative Learning Experiences, a national provider of continuing legal education and professional development programs that leave participants engaged, encouraged, and equipped to pursue meaningful and sustainable change in their practices, their lives, and the organizations they work in. And by Osborne Conflict Resolution, your experienced guides through the uncharted terrain of business and family law disputes, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Thriving Lawyers Podcast.